for coming and joining us and honoring these really incredible servicemen with an incredible story. And really, as we talk about, actually, Mr. Speaker, I came to the floor yesterday. Yesterday, I came to this very spot to talk about my uncle. My uncle was one of the Alcatraz 11, lives not far from the Capitol here in Washington. He was flying off the USS Coral Sea in an F-8 Crusader and was shot down on a low-level mission flying about 1,000 feet above the ground. Now, for those, Mr. Speaker, that don't know what an F-8 Crusader is, it is a jet that can fly at Mach 1.72, nearly twice the speed of sound. And when it was filled up with smoke after he was hit, he had very little time to eject. Ejected, his parachute opened about 35 feet above the ground, and he broke his back on impact. Now, this is an incredible story. Yesterday marked the 50th anniversary of being shot down. That was one of the darkest days, I would argue, certainly in our family, but for American servicemen and certainly aviators, that's certainly a very dark day. Today, February 12th, it marks a very different day, a day for us to rejoice because it was the day that marks Operation Homecoming, the day that nearly, well, over 600 American POWs would eventually be released. And February 12th was the day that those first POWs would be released from the Wallow prison. The Wallow prison, Mr. Speaker, was a prison that was built by the French. And unspeakable things happened at this prison. What's incredible to me is not the darkness of what happened at the Wallow prison, and a prison that we know today as the Hanoi Hilton. What's remarkable to me is the fact that these servicemen relied upon faith and honor to get them through, and largely each other. So I want those that may be tuning in to put themselves in the place of an American aviator jumping on board a jet. Put yourself perhaps in the cockpit of that F-8 Crusader. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not revealing any news when we talk about American servicemen and women being a little bit cocky if they're out there flying. I think some might think that they're invincible. Well, the world changed, certainly for my uncle and for many, on the day of their captivity. They no longer had that aircraft. They no longer had their sidearm. They no longer had their uniform. All was stripped from them. They were issued, in essence, a pair of pajamas and a pair of sandals. Little did my uncle or Sam Johnson or Nels Tanner or Jim Stockdale or Jeremiah Denton or John McCain or many of the other POWs realize how long this conflict would continue. What they did know was that each and every one of them, as an American fighting man, was going to return home with honor. Many of you may know, Mr. Speaker, the story of John McCain. His father was very high up in the United States Navy. The Vietnamese knew that they had a prize when they had John McCain, and he was offered early release. They were going to give him a free pass home and comfort to be back here in the United States. The devastation that would have done to the POWs, the morale, would have been devastating. And so he turned them down. The Vietnamese said it was going to be very bad for you now, Mr. McCain, and indeed it was. And he, as well as the other Americans in captivity, would endure years of torture. The Big Four, Mr. Speaker, was name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. And these men would be tortured for additional information. And every American well, I'm going to say every person, at least everyone that I know, has their breaking point. And certainly American POWs are no different. They set up a system. They set up, in essence, a military operation following rank. Jim Stockdale was the highest ranking officer and therefore sent word out that they were, if they were broken, to be able to stiffen their back up and give no additional information next time. That tap code system that you heard the gentleman from Texas talk about, the 5x5 matrix, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. They eliminated the K because they needed to have a 5x5 foot matrix. Rows and columns. First the row, then the column. Right? So B is first row, second column. And really the way they did it is shave and a haircut 2 bits is how you started this conversation. So most Americans know that if you give the rap, they're going to respond. And that's when you knew there was an American on the other side of the wall. If they got any sort of a different response, they knew that it was most likely not an American, and therefore they were going to stop their communication. What was going on through those walls was literally like a whole hundreds of woodpeckers were going nonstop, day in and day out, letting people know that it was okay, that they had them. They knew when someone was coming. They could hear the keys rattling, and they knew that their comrade was going to be taken out and tortured and beaten. And so when they got back to their cell, that tap code would go, letting them know that there was somebody there for them. Incredible. Now, out of the hundreds of POWs that went to North Vietnam and were captured, there was a crew of the 11 greatest threats to camp security, according to the North Vietnamese. They became known as the Alcatraz 11. My uncle, Bob Shoemaker, was one of the Alcatraz 11, along with Admiral Stockdale, who was shot down in 1965, was the senior U.S. officer present during the camps. And he was considered to be a big troublemaker, no question. Also, George Coker, who was shot down in 1966. Jeremiah Denton, who was a United States Senator from the great state of Alabama, was shot down in 1965. Harry Jenkins was shot down also in 65. Sam Johnson, who we talked about, who we have the honor of serving with here in the United States Congress, was shot down in 1966 on his 25th combat mission. George McKnight, shot down in 1965. James Mulligan was shot down in 1966. Howard Rutledge was shot down in 65. Ron Stortz of the Alcatraz 11 was the only one who did not make it home alive. Nels Tanner has a unique story, was the last of the Alcatraz 11. Nels Tanner got his ticket to Alcatraz by making the Vietnamese look bad. When he was being tortured and trying to give information about who was his commanding officer, Nels Tanner told them that it was Ben Casey and Clark Kent. Well, here in America, everybody knows Ben Casey and Clark Kent are not real figures. And when word got back to the Vietnamese that they had been made a joke and made a joke of, he got his ticket to Alcatraz. Now, I want, Mr. Speaker, people to understand Alcatraz for a minute. The reason why these 11 men went to Alcatraz is because they were the thorn in the side of the North Vietnamese. They were the ones that resisted the hardest. They were the ones that caused the problems. Now, the American fighting men in the Wallow prison, the Hanoi Hilton, they also caused problems, but these 11 were signaled out. And they went into a cell that was about 4 feet, the most generous, about 4 feet by 9. Now just imagine that, 4 feet by 9. It's about yay big and 9 feet in front of you. They spent, on average, about 2.5 years, the Alcatraz 11, in this prison camp. They're able to get out of their cell for 15 minutes a day